So this is a very important topic, as all the topics we do are. If I didn't think it was important, we wouldn't do it. So you're never going to hear me say, this is not a good topic to do. It's not important. That's why we're doing it. Well, over the years, I have heard a lot of definitions of faith. I have, of course, dialogue with people that do not understand what biblical faith is. And sometimes as Christians, we get a little confused as well. So I thought tonight we would talk a little bit about biblical faith, what it is, what it isn't, comparing some cultural definitions, which are certainly not correct as well, and maybe talk about some things that might help us as well. What's the relationship to faith, the knowledge, between faith and knowledge, some of those issues. So if you've never heard some of this stuff, that's okay. If it's all new, that's okay. It's why we're here, but it's an important topic. So Mark Twain, that famous guy that wrote some of those books you probably read, because you know what the books are, said this once: faith is believing what you know ain't so. That is about as backwards from the Bible as can be. So for a great writer he was, and came up with some great things to write about, he certainly did not understand what biblical faith is, but that's okay. There's been all kinds of brilliant people throughout the centuries, or have made significant contributions to our world, that do not understand what biblical faith is. It's a common problem. Sometimes atheists have tried to give definitions of what faith is, and they've been quite wrong as well, continue to be wrong. One of them says here that faith is pretending to know what you don't know. Richard Dawkins, a famous atheist, probably one of those famous atheists in the last 30 years, he said that faith is belief without evidence and reason. Coincidentally, that is the definition of delusion. And then we have another one by Sam Harris, another famous atheist, who says faith is generally nothing more than the permission religious people give one another to believe things so strongly without evidence. So, of course, many atheists have always assumed that faith is divorced from knowledge. You don't really know anything at all. You just believe and hope for the most, or hope for the best, and there's really no knowledge behind it at all. My aunt said to me once, she said, well, faith is just belief. It's belief. And so she kind of probably had this definition as well as we're talking about right here. And that's a problem, of course. So these are the common problems that we have in our culture, and they continue on. And so we need to correct these. Richard Dawkins, another definition, he says faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of the lack of evidence. So, these definitions go on. He was quite mistaken. So the first thing we need to understand where these guys go wrong and some of their definitions is that they're assuming that faith is not attached to knowledge, meaning, like I said, it means you really don't know anything. You just believe and hope for the best. But there's no it's not really grounded in anything, and if it is, there's no knowledge. You don't really know. Okay. And when we talk about our faith, we say, the object of our faith is the one true God, because faith has to have an object, right? And we say that the object of our faith is God or Jesus, like Jesus says in John 17:3, says, this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you've sent. So notice he says, this is eternal life. That quality of life starts right now, that they know you, that they have knowledge of you, God, and the knowledge of the only true God. and knowledge of his son Jesus. So Jesus doesn't say there, this is eternal life that they hopefully know or they just have belief and don't know anything. No, he says that they know you, that they have knowledge of you. Okay. So if we're going to have eternal life, you've got to have knowledge of God. Okay. You might say, well, we have to have faith in God, but Jesus says here you have to have knowledge of God. Okay. That's what know means, to have knowledge. Um, and so that, I'm sorry, daughter's texting me and it's important, but I had to respond. Okay. And then we have in Exodus 22-3, it says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. And that is, in Exodus 22-3. And so, it's again, the object of our faith, he's telling the Israelites, the object of their faith is him, the one true God. So it's clear that our faith has an object. Okay. And we see here, the common sayings in our culture, people say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious, or I believe in a higher power, I believe in the spiritual realm, but I don't adhere to any particular religion. That's a real problem because they really don't have any object of their faith. There is no object. It's just kind of vague and nebulous. It's just like, well, I'm just spiritual. I don't really know what I believe. I don't know what the God is I believe in. You can't define him. It's too mysterious. It's just, there's no knowledge really of anything. It's just very, very vague, right? And that's kind of popular today, to be in that realm, kind of say that. It sounds like very spiritual, like I'm not adhering to any organized religion, I'm just spiritual. So in the meantime, the person who says this isn't accountable to their God, because they can't even define the God they believe in. There's no object to their faith, right? He's not personal. They couldn't tell you what it is. So it's a very lazy approach, of course. And it says here that, when we think about faith in the Bible, faith is directly related to faithfulness. Faith and faithfulness go hand in hand, right? So faith, or we might say faith is equated to faithfulness, reliability, fidelity, and commitment. Okay. So those who have faith will be faithful, of course. Faith leads to faithfulness. And when this is a really great quote by Greg Kokel, and he is the founder of Stand to Reason. That's an apologetics ministry. You can look it up, Stand to Reason. But he has a great quote here. He says, Christians do not use faith in order to discover knowledge. Rather, faith is their response to knowledge they've already obtained by some other means. So notice he says here, Christians do not use faith in order to discover knowledge. Faith is a response to knowledge they've already obtained by some other means. You know what he's saying? When we came to faith in the Lord, we responded to the knowledge God had given us. God gives us knowledge through revelation. He reveals knowledge to us, and then we respond to that knowledge. Like you don't know who a person is, you don't have a relationship with a person until they reveal themselves, right? They have to talk to you, they have to write something down, email you, text you, whatever. Then you begin to have knowledge of who the person is. Now, you can know some things about the person, but it doesn't mean you really know them relationally or intimately, right? So God reveals knowledge of himself, like I said, and then we have to respond to the knowledge he's given us through faith. We trust in him based on the knowledge he gives us. Okay. We get it reversed sometimes. We think we discover, it's like opposite. We think we use faith to find the knowledge. Okay. It's not the way it works. God is a relational being, and God, just like human relationships, he has to reveal himself and give knowledge of himself. And that's what he does through the world of creation and history, as we'll talk about. Like I said many times, when students answer this question, does God exist? I get way more yeses than nos, which is a good thing. Most of them say that they think there has to be some God in the world of creation. So they think God has given knowledge of himself in some way, and in the most common way they say is through creation. And God gives us knowledge of himself through, as I said, through the natural world. That means we don't need to know the Bible to know some things about God. We can understand who God is through the world of nature. We can explore the creation. We see the effect of creation. We can infer back to a God. God reveals himself through the created world, and then he reveals himself through history. So he gives knowledge of himself through nature and history. Okay. And then we either respond to that in faith or we don't, right? I mean, Paul says in Romans 1 that God makes himself clear as day, known through the world of creation. It's clear as day in Romans 1, but people don't respond to that knowledge. They suppress it, they turn away from it, they turn to idolatry, and they don't have faith, right? They don't trust in God. We know Jesus comes. He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He says many times that, you know, he said people love darkness rather than the light. He said, you know, that people, you know, he does miracles in front of people. We know some people still don't believe. I mean, he gives knowledge of himself to his own audiences, and some believe, some don't, some trust in him, some don't. And so, yes, God has to communicate through knowledge, and then we respond in faith. And then in Romans 1, it says here, well, I already talked about this. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip this slide. This is what I just mentioned. So, you know, most people, as I said, when you think about God's existence, um, you know, that they don't, I mean, the average person, I said back here, this board here with saying yes to the God question, they do not view they think the naturalistic view of how we got here is kind of silly. I mean, most people, not all people, but many people, you know, to believe the universe was produced by a mindless, non-conscious, non-moral process, to believe that we were produced by an undirected, valueless process, to believe that life somehow emerged from non-living matter, and to believe that all the cosmic constants just happen to be right, and we just got lucky, you know, with the right universe. That's what, you know, some people believe. If there's no God, that's what you would have to say. But many people think that is just silly. They think that it's unrealistic. And Stephen Meyer talks about this in greater detail in his book, Return of the God Hypothesis. He talks about the alternatives of how we got here. And he thinks that a personal God is the best explanation. And when we look at he talks about, you know, we look at God in the beginning of the universe, we look at the evidence for the beginning of the universe, the design of the universe, or the design of DNA. There's other things too, like there's a moral law that transcends all people groups and cultures, and people's desire to preserve human dignity, equality, and rights, those kinds of things. These things all, you know, are traces of knowledge of God all around us. Okay. And because obviously some people understand it and some don't. And so knowledge of God through the natural world, through studying him in nature, is only like a partial knowledge. We don't get a full picture of who God is just studying the universe, or studying the DNA code, or studying God in the realm of biology or cosmology or astronomy or chemistry, whatever it is. You know, we wouldn't find out in those studying those things, that God is a triune being, right? And that is only going to happen through history. That means that God's going to have to give a fuller revelation of himself through history, and that's what he does through the person of Jesus. And of course, through the Bible and through the nation of Israel, ultimately leading to the person of Jesus. So it is true that, you can study these things back here, like these features, and you could arrive to some kind of deistic God, or maybe some kind of intelligence, some kind of God that is, obviously a highly intelligent being and has to be somewhat personal, but you're not going to understand, or could be somewhat personal as well. It doesn't have to be deistic. I mean, it can be certainly a personal God. But the point is that, well, I'm sorry, deistic God is personal. He stops after creating the universe. He doesn't do anything. But the point is that you wouldn't understand God completely if you didn't go further into history. And so when we look into history, we see that God is involved in the world of history. That we think it's plausible, if God wants humans to know what he's like, that he would act in history and communicate to us through a miracle. Like, he need to show humanity a sign, he's there. Of course, we believe he did that through the person of Jesus, or through prophets and a written text. They all go together. But the point is that we think God has actually communicated in history as well. Now, remember that there's a big difference between belief that and belief in. And you may have never heard of this before, but when you're thinking about apologetics and giving evidence or reasons for your faith, you can help someone to get to the point where they believe that God exists. Let's say if they don't even believe that God exists, and you give them some good reasons or evidence to believe that God exists. But that doesn't mean that they would necessarily have belief in God. They have to go from belief that to belief in. Basically, they have to go from belief that God exists to trusting that God exists. They have to have saving faith. So you could have all the evidence for God in the world and still not have saving faith. You still have to move from belief that to belief in, and that honestly is only done through the work of the Holy Spirit. We can't make anybody move from one to the other. Okay. So that's why we trust the Holy Spirit always to move the will of the individual, right? So they will go from belief that to trust in him, belief that to belief in him. Okay. And, if you think of an illustration, if you think about, like, when we believe things to be true, we have to intellectually assent. Like, we believe in our minds, like we assent. Like, if I have a chair that I'm sitting on right now, which I am, and I intellectually assent to the fact that the chair is going to support me when I sit down, I first have to agree that chair is going to do that. But then when I sit down in the chair, obviously I'm trusting, the trust takes place. I'm trusting in the chair itself, right? By sitting in the chair. Okay. Like, you could look at a chair and say, okay, am I going to intellectually assent to that chair is going to support me? What if the chair isn't well made? What if it's flimsy? What if it looks like it's half broken? You may say, I can't intellectually assent to that chair supporting me, so I'm not even going to trust it. I'm not going to sit in it, right? So you first will intellectually assent to something before you actually trust. But many people can intellectually assent. They can intellectually agree with the facts about God and about Jesus, but they still may not trust in him. Okay. And you have to go from the assent part to actual trust. And so it is true that many people, that can happen to a lot of people. Like, all kinds of people can know facts about Jesus and facts about God, and know, historical facts and Bible trivia and Bible facts, but it doesn't mean that they have saving faith. It doesn't mean they've actually come to trust in God or trust in Jesus. So you could take an example of this story right here in Mark 5. When Jesus restores a demon-possessed man, it's pretty clear that the man, the demon in the man, believes in who Jesus is. He believes that Jesus really is the Son of the Most High, right? So he certainly acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of the Most High, that he is the Son of God. But obviously, that demon doesn't have any saving faith, right? He just has knowledge that Jesus is the Son of the Most High, but he doesn't really have saving faith, right? And same thing with James 2, where it says, someone will say to you, you have faith and I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. So even the demons believe that God exists, that the one true God exists, but they do not have belief in the one true God. They don't have saving faith, right? They don't trust in him, right? So big difference between belief that and belief in. And apologetics can only get people to belief that. It can't take them all the way to belief in. That's something the Holy Spirit has to move them from belief that to belief in. So I've had people come to apologetic events and listen to lectures and say, it's really interesting and really convincing, but to my knowledge, some of them never really came to saving faith. I mean, some of them may have, but I'm saying I know the ones years later I talked to them and they're still kind of on the fence. They never came to belief in the one in Jesus. They just still are at belief that the Holy Spirit has to move them beyond that. Now, that's why when you see miracles in the Bible, the miracles are supposed to reveal who the one true God is, to get people to believe that this is the one true God. This is God, that God is real. But once that knowledge is imparted and they're at the point of belief that, they then have to go to belief in. They're supposed to bow their knee and trust in God. They're both supposed to humble themselves and really give their lives over to God and trust in him. That's why, sometimes Jesus refused to do any more miracles at some point, because some people were just looking for miracles. They didn't want to, they kind of liked the entertainment part of it, but they never would fully trust in God or trust in Jesus. So that's really important. That's why today, by the way, someone says to you, if I just had a sign, if God would just give me a sign, I believe. Well, there's no guarantee that if someone got some sort of sign from God that they would bow their knee to him and submit to him. Okay. They could just kind of be like, okay, yeah, there might be some God, whatever. There's no guarantee it's going to move their will, or their will is going to be moved to repent and trust in God and obey God, right? So they're making the assumption that how they're going to respond to some sort of sign, but God knows ahead of time how they're going to respond. He's way too smart for that. And he knows sometimes they're not even going to there's going to be no change whatsoever. So the point is that if you look at these three definitions of faith, if you look at like emotional faith, this is the feeling or assurance or trust or confidence in a person. This includes hope, which is much stronger than a wish or peace, which is much stronger than a mere calm. Or you can talk about what's called intellectual faith, where we have like a set of propositions. Like if you look at a doctrinal statement on a church, they say, I believe in blah, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are summarizations of what they believe in a creedal formula or else a propositional formula of their statement of faith, and that's fine. But there's a difference between volitional faith. Volitional faith is where you actually step out in faith and you obey God. That's an act of the will, right? That's what it means to be faithfulness, right? So you can have all the correct beliefs, all the right orthodoxy, but it doesn't mean it'll lead to you obeying God. It doesn't mean it'll lead you to step out and obey God, right? You have to know God personally. You obviously have to be willing to trust him and step out and obey him, right? It's an act of the will. And that's why, as you know, there's always been a huge problem with nominalism in churches. Nominalism is when people only have belief in Jesus in name only, right? He has no bearing on their lives. People may attend church for many years. They can participate in committees and participate in functions. They just self-identify as Christians, but it's just a label. I mean, they don't even really have saving faith. They've never even come to know Jesus. And I run into a lot of people like this on campus. I run into people have some Christian background, affiliation, but they don't really know Jesus. They don't have saving faith. Some of them don't know. I mean, they just don't know. They've never been told the gospel. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it means to repent and believe. They don't know what a disciple is. So there's always been a lot of nominalism still there to this day. Now, remember that neither faith nor belief are actually inspired words. It's really quite distant from the real meaning of what pistis is, which that's what the word faith is, or pistuio. Believe in the Bible, this is, the word pistis means faithfulness, reliability, fidelity, and commitment. So let's go ahead and fill that in a couple passages here and see what that looks like. Okay, if we use that definition. So Paul says in Titus 2:10, Paul says that slaves should not steal, but should display all good pistis. That means faithfulness, reliability, fidelity, commitment towards their masters, right? Paul is not saying the slaves should entirely trust in their masters, but rather they should show complete faithfulness or loyalty to them. Matthew's gospel, while discussing tithing, Jesus calls down woes on the Pharisees, neglecting more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and pistis. There's that word, if you use the right translation. Jesus is saying they're demonstrating their behavior a lack of faithfulness or fidelity to God and his law. Okay? So that is the benefit sometimes of looking at the languages at times. Okay? You can get a richer, fuller meaning of what some things mean, of course, obviously. Now, as you just want to emphasize again, believing faith is cognitively active. Believing is something you do with your mind as a function of thought. So that's one aspect of faith, because you believe your spouse is the right one. Whoever you came to marry, you obviously there's a cognitive aspect. You have to believe in your mind that she's the right one, otherwise you didn't get married. Now, that's different from trusting, because when you went to the altar, you then went from believing cognitively that she was the right one to actually trusting in her in a lifelong commitment. You took a step of trust and you made a fidelity commitment to your spouse, and that involved your will. So your cognition you moved beyond your cognitive belief onto the actual trust and commitment part. But you first had, of course, that have sufficient reasons for why you were making that commitment. Okay. That's generally the way it works. Both of those things are part of faith. Believing faith, trusting faith, they go together. So just like when you went to the altar, for those of us that have been through this, maybe you haven't, you can still understand the analogy. You have knowledge your spouse is the right one for you, but you may still have some gaps of knowledge, of course. You can't see into the future. There's some level of uncertainty. You don't have 100% exhaustive knowledge of how everything's going to work out. If you did, that you'd be the first person to have that. You don't know whether your spouse is going to be faithful to you, 100% certainty. You assume she is, and you probably may have a very high confidence level they will be, he or she. And you have a high confidence level, everything's going to work out. But we know through life, it seems to be that, we have gaps of knowledge and sometimes things go the opposite direction. But the point is that even though we didn't have an exhaustive level of knowledge when we got married that day, we still took a step of trust and obeyed, a step of trust and committed that day, right? Even though we may have had some unanswered questions or some, maybe some concerns, whatever they would have been, gaps of knowledge. That's the way life works. Same thing, just about everything in life. Biblical faith this is a good definition of biblical faith. Biblical faith is trust or confidence in something that's based on knowledge or good reasons. Okay. If you think about every commitment you made in life, as I just used the marriage example, but who you married, where to live, what job to take, what to eat, what repair shop to use, where to vacation, how to invest your money, where to go to church, you have good reasons for committing to these things, right? But you may not have 100% certainty it's the right decision. You may have some gaps of knowledge, some unanswered questions, but you still made those commitments. Some of those things, of course, maybe not what repair shop to use, but big decisions like marriage, job, where to live. I mean, there's always going to be some gaps of knowledge, um, unanswered questions, but we still committed, right? But the point is that we had reasons why we committed to these things. So, as I say here, number three, you need to ask yourself, why have you chosen to commit to the God, the Bible, and Jesus Messiah? You should as well have some reasons, right? You have chosen to trust in the God of the Bible and Jesus and Messiah. And I think you probably do. I hope you do. So always remember that the object of our faith is always God or Jesus, but reasons or evidence is a thing that supports our faith. Okay, the object of our faith is not reasons or evidence. We just have reasons why we trust in God or Jesus. Okay, the apostles, of course, had reasons for their faith, right? We know that in the New Testament, the primary reason they thought that Jesus was who he was because he fulfilled many prophecies of the Old Testament. That's the way they preached the gospel. They said, there are things talked about in the Old Testament in history about the coming of the Messiah, and now God is bringing them to pass in the person of Jesus. That's an evidential reason that Jesus fulfills history. And if you read the book of Acts, we see, of course, that that's the main way they spread the gospel through the use of messianic prophecy. You just go right to the book of Acts. Most of the sermons, if not all of them, appeal to fulfill prophecy and the resurrection, of course. So anyway, so they had reasons for their faith. And of course, they talked about they were witnesses. They said, we were eyewitnesses to his resurrection. That's why we have faith in him, because we actually were with him when he rose from the dead. We touched him, we ate with him, we saw him, and we are eyewitnesses to this thing. And that's another one of the main reasons they had for trusting in Jesus. He said he was going to rise from the dead. They didn't see it happen, but they saw him afterwards. They were witnesses to him after he came out of the tomb. And of course, they were with him and saw him and ate with him and touched him and everything. And they wrote about it here. They said, we are all witnesses. We are witnesses. We are witnesses. We are witnesses. We are witnesses. And then, of course, John ends the gospel this way. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. You believe and you may have life in his name. So John makes it clear why he's recording this. He says, I want you to have reasons in this book as to why you can trust in Jesus as a Messiah, as the Son of God. We want you to believe in him. But, these things we record here are all recorded here so you may believe. Now, about the passage in Hebrews that a lot of people butcher. It says in Hebrews 11, 1-3, says, now faith is the evidence or substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For if the elders obtained a good testing by faith, they understand the worlds are framed by the word of God, so things are seen were not made of things which are visible. A lot of people quote this passage out of context, and they assume that what it's saying is the following, that, well, it says faith is the evidence of things not seen. So, if you can't see God, God doesn't exist. We can't see God, therefore God does not exist. So they kind of take it as a teaching that basically belief in God or faith in God is completely blind, non-evidential. We don't have any good reasons. It's just, you can't use your senses. You can't see God. So they're misunderstanding this passage. First of all, they're reading it out of context. If you read it in context, all the way through, it talks about these different people, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Rahab, others, it's not talking about like an evidential perspective, like, oh, I can't see God. It's talking about people that had experienced God in their lives. They had seen God act already. They already had knowledge of who God was, but they stepped out in the future for the future without knowing how it was going to be fulfilled. They took a step of faith based on the promises of God, trusting in God and his promises, not knowing what would happen. And just like Abraham, Noah, others, God told, they had a relationship with God. They'd seen God act. They had trust in God. And then God challenged them to take a step of faith in certain areas. And they said, okay, even though I don't know how this is all going to work out, I'm going to go ahead and trust God. So all you have to do is read the whole passage in context. It talks about these different people in the Bible, different stories about how they had to step out and without knowing how the future would play out. And that's the way a lot of times it is with us. Of course, God will challenge us to take a step of faith in a certain direction. We'll say, what's going to happen? He's not going to tell us because that's what faith is. And we have to wait. And then the future will show later on what he was talking about. But for the beginning point or the starting point, we don't know, and that's how God builds our faith one step at a time. So, some people, you hear that phrase leap of faith. Some people go back to a guy named Kierkegaard, and he was a really famous um, existentialist writer. He was actually a Christian. And they think that he was the first one to make that phrase leap of faith. He never really said leap of faith. He was a existentialist, and what he believed is that eventually you just had to go beyond reason, and you had to basically you do need to take a step of faith. He never really said leap of faith. He kind of referred to as leap to faith. He said eventually, he said faith cannot be founded by like a scientific method or an empirical observation completely. He said eventually you must have to have faith. He's there. You must have take this step. You're going to have to go beyond that and take a step of faith. You're never going to get that complete objective knowledge that you want. You need to take a step of faith. But he never said really leap of faith. And, I think that some people think, think a leap of faith, you think of like the Indiana Jones movie in The Last Crusade, where he puts his foot out and then the bridge shows up. He doesn't really know what's going to happen at all. He just kind of puts his foot out. But, I think some people think that that's what biblical faith is. It's like to believe in something no evidence for, kind of like the Indiana Jones movie, but that's not really what biblical faith is. By the way, this is a really bad billboard on a church. Okay. That's just not good. Okay. So, because you think about it, if that's true, if reason is the greatest enemy of your faith, then if I go back here, if God gives us reasons to believe, let's say we go back here and the Jews had Old Testament prophecy. They had reasons to believe because Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecy, which is really a form of evidence. You could just say that they were mistaken by appealing to this because really they just need to have faith, but they're actually giving reasons why they have faith. They're giving fulfilled apologetics, doing apologetics and talking about fulfilled prophecy. So that is kind of ridiculous. And then, Jesus says in John 20-29, he says, blessed are those who've not seen yet have believed. He did say that, but you never want to read the passage out of context, because then it goes on to say, therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, right? I said this, but these have been written so you may believe. So, for the most part, Jesus did do a lot of stuff to show who he was. He didn't just show up and say, just believe. He did miracles upon miracles. He said in many passages in John, look, he says, the works which the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works that I do, testify about me, that the Father has sent me. And he says, if I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe in me. But if I do them, though you do not believe me, believe the works. So you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. And then he says, believe me that when I say I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, or believe the evidence of the miracle themselves. And Jesus expected, Thomas, when Thomas came to him and said, I won't believe unless I touch his wounds, he called him Doubting Thomas. But Jesus expected Thomas to believe the testimony of others. And that was a good reason to believe. Thomas didn't, and Jesus certainly showed him what he needed, gave him what he needed. But I think Jesus was probably thinking like, you've heard that I'm alive, you've talked to the other disciples, you don't trust their testimony. What's wrong with their testimony? They're telling you the truth. So in many cases, though, Jesus did things to show who he was, right? And these things are evidence of these are evidence, these are evidences. So, and then let me go back to that can't see God part. So I've talked about this before. There's a lot of things you don't see directly in life. You don't see electrons directly. You don't see protons directly, neutrons, atoms, electric fields, magnetic fields, gravitational fields. I don't see I don't see the law of justice in front of me. It's an immaterial reality. I can't put it in a test tube. I see the effects of justice when obviously hopefully a court hearing has happened and, hopefully justice is served. Many cases it's not because the legal process seems to be quite corrupt these days, but I don't see justice directly. I see the effects of justice. I see the effects of electrons. I see the effects of neutrons, protons. I see the effects of the wind. I see the effects of all these things. I don't see them directly. It's the same thing with God. We don't see him directly. We see his effects in the world. They're all around us. Okay. We can see the effect. We see a universe that has a beginning. Time, space, and matter had a beginning. We know that scientifically the universe began to exist. Now we know this, there evidence is in cosmology, had a beginning point. That's an effect. What's the cause? It needs a cause outside the universe, outside time, space, and matter to cause that. That would be God. We see the universe is also precisely set up for life to get going on Earth. That's the effect. What's the cause? We see the planet Earth is set up to support life and sustain life on Earth. That's the effect. What's the cause? We see the DNA's instruction manual blueprint for the human cell. That's the effect. What's the cause? We see the laws of logic we're discovering codified, which plays a role in how we reason. That's the effect. What's the cause? We see that humans have consciousness. Consciousness is something that are your thoughts, sensations, introspection. That is something that is immaterial. It can't be explained by matter alone. That's an effect, not a cause. What is the cause of that? Or else the humans have moral knowledge. They care about moral values and moral duties. That's another effect we see, but what's the cause of that? And we see the humans care about purpose, meaning, and identity. That's an effect we see in humans, but what's the cause of that? And finally, of course, we see that Jesus is the most influential person in the history of mankind. That's an effect. But what's the cause of this? Well, there's two kinds of causes you can go to. You can either you can explain these effects through an intelligent cause, which is a personal God, or you can go to a completely natural cause, which is no God, saying no mind, no intelligence, no creator. So an undirected natural process can account for all those things. Or you can say there's an intelligent cause, a personal creator that's endowed with rationality, self-consciousness, and volition. And that is the cause of those things we just saw. That's how we explain those effects. There's only two options there, right? And then, just let me emphasize, if you ever run into anybody that says that They might say, well, I no longer believe, I no longer believe that God exists. I no longer believe Jesus is his son. I just don't believe anymore. Um, and the way the argument lays out is that if they no longer believe, the conclusion would be that I guess God doesn't exist and Jesus isn't the son of God. If you don't believe it anymore, I mean, that's going to make it not true. Your psychology has nothing to do with whether God exists or Jesus is the son of God. Just, you understand that? God was already God. He already existed before you came to believe in him. And Jesus was already the son of God before you came to believe in him. And him rising from the dead or not rising from the dead has nothing to do with whether you believe in it. It's an historical claim. It's like saying John Wilkes Booth killed Abraham Lincoln. He either did or he didn't. Me believing it has nothing to do with the factuality of it. It either happened or it didn't happen historically. Okay. So you stop believing in Christianity. That doesn't mean Christianity's false. It's not based on your belief. Okay. If all your faith does is appropriates what God has already revealed. He's revealed himself through creation and history. So he either exists or he doesn't exist. Okay. That's an objective truth claim. That's outside yourself. God's existence is an objective truth claim. If I say God exists, that's an objective truth claim. It's not subjective. It's not based on my preference, my feelings, my psychology. It's a claim outside of yourself, outside myself. Okay. God's an objective reality. And Jesus is either his son or he isn't. Either he came 2,000 years ago or he didn't. And he either rose from the dead or he didn't. And that's an historical claim. All right. Now, let me wrap up with what happens when we have a circumstantial faith, which most of us have been through this. So when we fall into the trap of only having a circumstantial faith, it can lead to some challenges because generally, if circumstances change, we begin to wonder whether God is good, right? And when these things in our lives that play a large role in our lives, which they all do, get threatened, we start to have a circumstantial faith. And we need to remember that the foundation of our faith is not an experience or an answer to prayer. The foundation of our faith is the Messiah, is Jesus, okay? That's the foundation of your faith. Your experiences can change, your prayer, you may get some answers to prayer, you may not, right? Circumstances change as well, but your foundation has to be in, of course, Jesus. Now, you guys know that passage in Matthew 7, the part where Jesus talks about the storm that came and the house that was built on the sand or the house that had the foundation, right? He talks about the storm came and the winds blew, and of course the one foundation wasn't there, right? It's based on sand, and the other foundation was built on Christ. And we find out eventually where our foundation is. Okay, life will throw us some curveballs. We'll find out how much of a foundation we really have. And a circumstantial faith, of course, it can be a faith that goes up or down depending on my current set of circumstances, right? We can tend to trust God and only believe in him when he's only doing what we want and only if it works for us, right? If it's working out in our lives, then God's good. If things are going well, Jesus is good. But, when life throws you some curveballs, that's when you find out is all you have is really a circumstantial faith. Because if your faith is primarily based on circumstances, it will be a weak faith, of course, and be prone to falling apart. Okay, because the problem with the circumstantial faith is that you're trying to interpret events through your own lens, and you simply don't have the ability to do that. You're not an exhaustive, you don't have the exhaustive knowledge. You're not an infinite being. You don't have omniscience. You can't see in the future. You can't even barely interpret your present events. So, that leads to problems. And so when we end up misinterpreting events and we don't understand things, then we get frustrated and then we fall into a circumstantial faith, right? And I think we probably know that Joseph, when he spent 15 years as a slave in Egypt, and I'd be willing to bet when Joseph got there, he was sold into slavery by his brothers. He's probably saying, I got a raw deal. Like this, something is really wrong here, right? And somehow, but of course, God was working behind the scenes, right? Preparing the future. And Joseph remained faithful to God. And then we know what happened in the story there. Um, when Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness and then God sent him back to Egypt, and he told Moses what he's going to do. It might have seemed purposeless to Moses, okay, at the time. But it's very hard to interpret our circumstances at times, and we try to act like we can perfectly, and we try to just control our circumstances perfectly. We get very frustrated, and we end up not trusting God, and we get more and more frustrated. And so I'm sure many of us have been through things, and some of us maybe will go through things. We just say, I don't have any explanation for this at all. I don't know what's going on. All I can do is trust God and cling to God the best of my ability and trust Him one day at a time. And I can't see into the future, but maybe I'll look back one day and say, okay, now I know why that happened. But in the present, I have no idea what's going on. Okay. Sometimes we just try too hard to understand it, but we can't. It's just human. It's just part of being human. We tend to do that. And so I hope that we don't fall into that, but I think all of us probably have to fight that on a regular basis, okay? Because circumstances in our lives change so much. But God is not changing. He's not changing one bit. We change, but he doesn't change, okay? His promises remain the same. His word remains the same. He's doing in your life what he's doing in my life. He's conforming us to the image of Christ. That's his main purpose in our life. He's changing us, making us more like Jesus, even though we can't see it. And he will use circumstances to change us, no doubt. So I hope that this has cleared up some confusion about faith. It's a little shorter than usual, but I hope that you learn some new things and perhaps we can discuss. No.